probably seen the headlines about the US national debt passing 35 trillion, then 36 trillion, and now climbing higher every single day. Every time it happens, a politician gets on TV, waves their hands, and acts like it's the end of the world. Then 3 minutes later, the segment ends. They go to a commercial break for a pickup truck, and everyone forgets about it. The numbers have gotten so absurdly large that they've completely lost all meaning. They're just giant abstract blocks of text on a screen that you scroll right past. But we shouldn't be scrolling past this anymore, because something fundamentally broke behind the scenes. Last year, net interest payments on the US national debt officially crossed a threshold that economists used to treat as a mathematical emergency brake. For the first time in modern history, the federal government is spending more money just paying the interest on past debt than it spends on national defense. Let that sink in. We are now spending more money keeping a running tab on our credit card bills than we are on the entire United States military apparatus. The CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, has been warning that America is walking toward a cliff, calling it the most predictable crisis we've ever faced. But nobody is asking the question sitting right in front of our eyes. How does an empire actually function when servicing its past? The stakes costs more than protecting its future. The answer to that starts with one number: $1.13 trillion. That's how much the Treasury paid out in net interest alone over the course of a single fiscal year. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 4 cents of every single dollar generated by the entire United States economy, handed straight to bondholders just for the privilege of rolling over old debt. Meanwhile, tax revenues are climbing, but they can't keep up with the compounding math. So the hidden engine driving this isn't just government overspending anymore. It's a structural trap built on interest rates that refuses to come down, no matter what the Federal Reserve does on television. Moving that much money out of sight isn't a trick you can invent overnight. It takes a system, one with a name, and it's a name Wall Street has spent the last 2 decades trying very hard to ignore. So we have to go back to the mechanics of how government debt actually works. Most people assume the national debt is like a giant mortgage held by China or foreign central banks. But the reality is much closer to home and much more dangerous. Over the last few years, the average interest rate the US government pays on its debt has more than doubled. For a decade after the 2008 financial crisis, the government got high on cheap money. They borrowed trillions of dollars at 1% or 2% interest. It felt like free real estate. Debt was piling up, but the annual interest bill stayed low because the cost of money was pinned to the floor. But then inflation hit, the Federal Reserve slammed on the brakes, and those cheap short-term loans started maturing. Every single month, hundreds of billions of dollars in older, dirt cheap government bonds expire. And when the Treasury goes back to the market to replace them, they aren't rolling them over at 1% anymore. They're rolling them over at 4% or 5%. It's like having a fixed-rate mortgage at 2% for 30 years, and then suddenly being forced to refinance every single month at current market rates. Your house hasn't changed, your job hasn't changed, but your monthly payment just quadrupled overnight. And before we get to how the government is keeping the lights on, a quick pause, because time is your most valuable asset. If you spend just 3 hours a day typing, going from 40 words per minute to 70 saves, you roughly 50 minutes daily, more than 300 hours per year. But what if you could type at 220 words per minute? How much time could you get back then? Which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Whisperflow. Whisperflow is a voice-to-X tool that actually works. Take a look. Hi Anna. Following up on the question from Thursday, I moved part of the position on the 14th. The 15th. And I want to confirm whether that triggers the wash sale rule, given I bought back in within 20 days. 30 days. Whisperflow cleaned up every mistake, removed the filler words, and formatted the whole thing all in about 15 seconds. But with Whisperflow, it's not just about speed, it's also the accuracy. Here's the same word spoken using two different tools. Whisper Flow on the left, built-in voice on the right. Whisper Flow stripped out my mistakes, handled the corrections, and got the spelling right, even the tickers. Whisper Flow turns your speech into clear, polished writing across any app, any device. If you're interested, Whisper Flow is free to use, and you can get 1 month of Whisper Flow Pro with unlimited words for free using the link below. Promo code CASUAL. Thank you to Whisper Flow for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the trap at the heart of the US. National debt and the math that broke the federal budget. The core problem isn't just that interest rates are higher. It's the compounding velocity of the debt itself. For most of American history, the economy grew faster than the debt, which meant the debt to GDP ratio naturally shrank over time, even if politicians ran small deficits. It's like having a large student loan, but getting a massive raise every year. Eventually, the loan becomes manageable. But we've crossed a dangerous tipping point known to economists as the fiscal doom loop. This happens when the interest rate on your debt is higher than your nominal economic growth rate. When you hit that point, every dollar of debt you already have automatically generates more debt on its own, completely independent of whatever new spending Congress votes on. You don't even need to fund any new programs. The existing balance sheet just feeds on itself. According to calculations by the Congressional Budget Office, nearly 75% of the projected growth in primary deficits over the next decade is driven purely by rising interest costs. It's a snowball rolling down a hill of wet snow, getting exponentially heavier with every rotation. And when the Treasury needs to fund this monster, they can't just print money without consequences, because printing money to buy your own debt is how you get inflation running hot enough to melt your currency. Instead, they have to sell those bonds to real buyers in the open market. And that brings us right back to the supply and demand problem we talked about in our last breakdown. Who is actually buying trillions of dollars of new US debt every single year? Historically, the answer was a combination of foreign central banks, domestic commercial banks, and large institutional funds. But foreign holdings of US treasuries as a percentage of the total debt have been steadily sliding